Okay, so maybe you got a tad bit lost in the code logics there on that last video, and that is totally understandable. So what I'm going to show you today is something that will help you to work your way through code bit by bit. And it also is really helpful for when you have errors. So I'm going to show you how to use the Chrome debugging tool. So here I have Google Chrome, and I have it opened to the file that I'm currently working on. So it's going to ask my letter grade for class 1. 2, 3, and 4. It says great job. There's your GPA. Well, if you want to use the Chrome debugging tool, which is really, really good, then you'll use, if you're on Windows, you'll hit Control Shift I, or if you're on a Mac, you'll hit Command Option I. And then regardless of which one you used, you will now click on this source column. And this source tab should look really familiar because this is just the code that you just wrote. And it's just displaying it here. The very cool thing about this is I can click on the number here and it will give me what's called a breakpoint. A breakpoint means stop the code from running and pause right here and then give me control of the code so I can control how it runs from here on out. So to demonstrate this in action, once you've clicked, you'll want to click on either a line that actually has code on it. So in this case, line 16 actually has some code that's doing some processing. And if it's doing processing, then you can pause it. So we're going to put a breakpoint there. And then what we're going to do is we're going to reload the page. And you'll notice rather than immediately popping up my pop-up like it used to, it is now paused. And it said, "Okay, we are on line 16. The highlighted portion of line 16 is about to run." So right now, counter is not set to anything. In fact, if we come over here, um, we've got this little thing called scope. If you open up scope, it'll show you all of the variables that you have. We'll talk a little bit about scope more in the future, but for now, you can see that you have a variable called counter and it has no value. Now up here, you've got some controls for controlling your loop. This one right here is the one I most often use. It's called step into. The difference between step over and step into is a little too nuanced at this point in the course. But for now, I would just work on the step into function. So I'm going to click this button and it's going to run the very next step of code. It basically means run the next step. So it runs the next step. Um, and we said for let counter equal 0. So now if we come to our block, we can see that counter is now 0. So it was undefined, now it's 0. So it first set our counter. Now we're looking at what the next step that's highlighted is counter less than 4. Well, 0 is less than 4, so we should expect this loop to run. So it's going to check this condition. You can hover over counter and see that it's 0. So say is 0 less than 4. 0 is less than 4, so if we click the next button, it drops into the for loop. So now we're inside of these curly braces. And it says let letter grade equal prompt. What is your letter grade for counter, which is 0, counter plus 1. So 0 plus 1 is 1. So we should expect if we hit this next button and say run line 18, we should see the prompt show up with what is your letter grade for class 1. So we'll hit next. It says what is your letter grade for class 1. I'm going to type B plus in here, and then I'm going to hit OK. Now that I've done that, if I hover over letter grade, you can see that it's now set to B plus. It was set to nothing, and now it's set to B plus. In fact, over here, you can see that GPA is set to nothing, but we're about to run this line of code. When we run this line of code, it'll take GPA from being set to unavailable to GPA being set to 0. So over here, you can either hit F11 or you can hit the next button. If you hit the next button, you can see that GPA is now 0. So over here we can see letter grade is B plus, GPA is 0. So then we can see how it evaluates an if statement. So it comes here to the first if statement and says, is B plus equal to A? B plus is not equal to A, so we should expect it to skip over those curly braces and go straight to line 24. And it did. Now we're seeing if B plus is equal to A minus. It's not, so we should expect to see it skip straight to line 27. Okay, now it's going to see if B plus is equal to B plus. It is, so we should expect to see it run line 28 rather than skipping it like it did the previous few. And then once it's done, to skip all the way to the end to line 57. So we'll hit the next button. will drop in. Our GPA is right now 0, but if we run this next line of code, our GPA has changed to 3.3, which is what we expected, and now we're on line 57. So it was able to skip over all of the additional else ifs and the else because one of the conditions evaluated to true. So now our total GPA started at 0, and now we're going to add on 3.3. So we're going to hit the next button, and boom, our total GPA is 3.3. And now it jumps up to the top and comes here to this counter. So right now counter is 0, but it's about to execute the part that's highlighted, which is this plus plus. Plus plus, if you remember, I said says increment it by 1. So if we hit the next button, counter is now 1. And 1 is less than 4, which means we should expect the loop to run. So it's going to drop into the loop. And it's about to prompt, what is your letter grade for class? The counter is 1. 1 plus 1 is 2. So we should expect the prompt to say, what is your letter grade for class 2? And I'm going to give it an A, so you can see how that works. Um, so letter grade is an A. GPA was previously set to 3.3, but now we've reset it back to 0. Our letter grade is A, so we should expect it to run line 22 and then skip all the way to the end of the if statement. So it runs line 22 and skips to the end of the if statement. Our GPA is 4. Take total GPA, which was 3.3, and then add on 4. Now, if you've run through your loop a couple of times, you can determine, let's say you had an error, but your loop is running perfectly. Then you can determine everything in this loop works. I don't need to test this loop anymore. So what you can do is you can put a breakpoint on line 61, and you can scroll up to line 16 and take your breakpoint off. And now you can say, okay, run through line 63. And then you'll hit the blue play button. So when I do this, it'll ask me for my letter grade for class 3, which will do C minus. And then it didn't pause the loop at all. And it just jumped straight through it and said, what is your letter grade for class 4? So the letter grade for class 4, we'll put in another A, and then it paused. It paused on the line that I told it I wanted to pause on. Because I'd run through the loop twice, I was confident my loop worked. So now I come here and I can see that total GPA is 13. That's not a real GPA. That's just the sum of each of the GPAs. Now we need to divide it by the number of classes that we took. In this case, we took 4 classes. So if we take our total GPA and divide it by 4, and we hit the next button, now our GPA is 3.25. So I'm going to show you a little trick here. If you want to test your if statement and you don't want to run all of the math to figure out what GPA combination will give you 3.3 or 2.3. Right now, 3.25 is not going to trigger this first if statement, but maybe I want to see if the code I wrote in that first if statement works. Well, because we've paused our code, we can actually execute some JavaScript here. So you can come over here on the left-hand panel and double click on total GPA, and it says 3.25, but we really want to check if greater than 3.3 works. So what we're going to do is we're just going to edit this value live. Ignore all the previous calculations and just edit this value so we can test a value. So let's test if exactly 3.3 works. So now total GPA is 3.3. If you hover over it, so we're seeing if 3.3 is greater than or equal to 3.3. Because we've now edited this value from what it was originally, we can now force the condition to happen and we can test our code. So if I hit the next button, now it was 3.25, but I've changed it to 3.3. So this condition evaluates to true. So now I'm going to get an alert that my total GPA is 3.3. Great job, whatever the rest of that message says. So if I hit the next button, it says your GPA is 3.3, great job, your consistent effort is paying off, keep challenging yourself and building on this progress. You'll hit OK, and it'll jump to the end of your script because you'll see everything else is just comments, so there was nothing for it to pause on. Now, if you were not using Live Server, that would be the end of the code and it would just show you your home screen. Because we're using Live Server has some extra JavaScript that it wrote in there, and you can just ignore that. So that's all of this stuff right here. And so to just get back to your main website, you can just hit this play button and boom, everything went as expected. And so that is how you use the debugger. I heavily encourage you to use it to step through complicated logic. Anytime you get stuck and you're confused about how something is working, step through it with a debugger and see if you can guess where it's going to go next. And that wraps up this section on the Chrome debugger. Thanks for watching.